This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Today on CityCast Madison. Did you hear about the Russian cyber attack that hit the UW system last year? Well, neither did we. Daily Cardinal campus editor Liam Barron broke the story around how 160,000 UW records were stolen in a global attack. And the UW system chose not to make a public statement. We sat down with Liam to find out what exactly happened. It's Tuesday, March 5th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Liam, hello.
Hi, Bianca.
So, you recently stumbled upon kind of an eyebrow-raising situation at UW involving a Russian cyber attack, where more than 100,000 university records were stolen. Take me back to the beginning of this story. When did the cyber attack occur?
This cyber attack was on the National Student Clearinghouse, which is a third party that a lot of different higher education institutes go through. It occurred on May 28th and affected thousands of organizations. The attack on the National Student Clearinghouse has affected over 900 universities. So this attack occurred on May 28th. The UW system was notified on June 28th.
Yeah, and so what types of records were accessed specifically?
Yeah, so over 160,000 records were accessed. 16 of those were detailed to contain some sort of personally identifiable information. So stuff like social security numbers, names, addresses, other information that could be tied back to people. In those remaining records, we don't exactly know what's in those. We tried asking the UW system about it, but hadn't heard a specific response back. There was also some of those 16 personally identifiable records that were later cut out because UW analysis found that they weren't actually containing personally identifiable information.
Do you know, how did this happen?
Yeah, so this is what's known as an SQL injection. So on public-facing web pages that use this program called MoveIt, this software called MoveIt, which is for file transfers. It's used across a bunch of different organizations. Some of these MoveIt internet-facing web applications were injected with like a data harvester. So that's why we see this across so many different organizations because, so many different organizations were using this MoveIt transfer tool. The NSC was one of them. And so when their data is harvested, it has a ripple effect across all the universities that go through them. The NSC is the predominant third party that universities use for their enrollment verification and other student services. So when the NSC has a data breach, even if they're a third party, that means that a ton of different universities have their data impacted and potentially stolen in this.
Yeah, and do we know what the hackers were after specifically? Was it that personal data? What kind of insights do we have around that?
Yeah, so this is a Russian-based ransomware group called Clop. We're not exactly sure. Money is a constant motivation in terms of personal information hacks. But in terms of what the organization is currently doing with that data, it's hard to pin down. It's not like they're particularly vocal about it. There were reports that some MoveIt transfer tool data had made its way onto the dark web, onto portals which people can use to, access personally identifiable information or other sort of, identity fraud-esque records. So, there's certainly a risk of identity fraud, and I think that's the, key thing that's on everyone's mind. For those remaining records, one expert that I talked to at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Information School worried that there might be a risk of re-identification, that even if we don't have information in those records, if you have certain information about a person, you could maybe use that to figure out who they were, even if it's not exactly their name or their address or something like that. But for the broader plans that CLOP has with this data, we're not exactly sure.
Well, so do we know, was it just students or was it students and staff who were affected?
I wasn't able to get a particular response from UW on that, but from what I've heard from other universities, they were concerned that, students, employees, even applicants who just only applied to those schools might have data in those records. So, a university official at the University of Illinois system told me that that was one of the reasons that they had gone with that public data breach notification, because it's not just students, it's everyone in the campus community. A spokesperson at MSU, Michigan State University, said the same thing.
I'm thinking about what this means for the people who have had their data accessed. Has the UW shared anything about trying to help them?
So people who were contacted through the NSC because their data was breached were offered free credit monitoring services. We haven't heard much else from the UW in terms of what they've been doing to assist potential victims of cybersecurity fraud. That wasn't something that was included in any statement to me, and I'm not sure what current methods that they're using.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit, about the timeline here. When did the university inform the public that these sensitive records with personal information was compromised?
So they never informed the public. We did get a inclusion of UW system schools in a regulatory report to California regulators in, I want to say, September. But in terms of a public notification for the data breach, the UW system didn't ever put out one. They said that it was because they felt that the situation didn't merit one. They felt the impact of the attack was small enough that they didn't, need to unnecessarily worry people. And that messaging was something that was not directly contested per se, but it challenged by the responses of other schools who sort of used the same justification as why they wanted to message about it. Because they were, unsure of how many people were affected, and it would be a lengthy identification process for the National Student Clearinghouse to identify everyone affected. So they wanted to get out a notification right away. UW didn't follow suit, and it is difficult to understand, at least from the outside, exactly the extent of a breach. Reporters, people outside the institution might not know what all that data contained. So that is one thing that experts I talked to sort of cautioned, that it's easier for people on the outside to sort of make a blanket statement, harder on the inside.
This episode is brought to you by Kia's first 3-row, all-electric SUV, the Kia EV9, with available all-wheel drive and seating for up to 7 adults. With 0 to 60 speed that thrills you 1 minute and available lounge seats that unwind you the next. Visit kia.com/EV9 to learn more. Ask your Kia dealer for availability. No system, no matter how advanced, can compensate for all driver error and or driving conditions. Always drive safely.
Does Monday at the office feel like a storm? Not with Microsoft Copilot. That feeling when Copilot gets everyone up to speed instantly? It's sunny again. When Copilot simplifies complex data so your teams can act, that sun's shining on a beach. And when Copilot uncovers hidden insights, you're on that beach with your people, and you find buried treasure. That's Microsoft Copilot. Learn more at Microsoft.com/AI for all.
One of the things that really struck me from your article was the differences between the schools that you talked to. That really stood out. Like, UW is giving one justification. You were hearing different justifications from universities, pretty comparable. Did you gather, why it took so long for the UW to tell the students and anyone who may have been impacted compared to others?
Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, we still don't really know, other than the explanation that they gave us in terms of, they felt that the data breach was small enough that it didn't merit a response. It was also a third-party data breach and not a data breach within their systems. And that's something that also comes into play in terms of legal requirements to notify people.
Yeah, and the only reason we really know now that there was this long delay between the attack and notification is because you filed an open records request. Can you talk about, how you found this?
Yeah, it was actually an unrelated open records request for different communications in the UW system. And then I received, among other emails, the data breach notification email. And from there, we started to look into it and try and understand, what's the sort of impact of this? What's the scale of this? How does it relate to the other NSC schools breach that we knew about? And so, yeah, it was definitely a pretty shocking moment of like, oh man, this is big. It also came at a sort of interesting time because UW-Madison just over that same weekend that the article that I published came out, UW-Madison had a security flaw that exposed letters of recommendation for their graduate programs. So it was like a little bit of a boot camp into some cybersecurity stuff for me. But no, it was a really sort of, interesting reporting journey to go on.
Oh, dear. And, you interviewed some professors, who are cybersecurity experts. How worried are they about the safety of UW's data?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think the primary concern that I heard about is on the sort of data sharing end. The fact that once we start sharing data with third parties, we don't have great controls over their security infrastructures. We don't have control over their crisis notification procedures. And we can certainly try and stipulate things in contracts, but ultimately our data is in their hands. And if they become the target of a third-party hack, we're, somewhat a victim of that. And so I think that's the primary concern that they had in terms of the UW system sort of cybersecurity state. One professor I talked to said that she would like to see a data minimization policy in place, that whenever we're sending data to third-party organizations, they get the least data possible so that they can do what they need to do. And it's something that, plays into current debacles that we're seeing across higher education. The higher education sphere is increasingly under cyber attack risk. There are institutions that handle tons and tons and tons of personally identifiable data. And so they're a great target for hackers in terms of, hey, so many students, so many employees, all sort of clumped in these institutions of 30, 40, 50,000 people. It's a really lucrative target and one that I think people have been saying, merits further protection.
Yeah, I'm curious, have you heard any reactions to your stories? Anything from other students about how they feel about this?
Yeah, in UW-Madison, there have been some concerns that I've heard from fellow students about, transparency related to this. Why didn't the public know? Why aren't there data breach notifications? Why weren't people, in charge of changing the policy on this sort of stuff notified about this? I think there is also, concerns about what data is out there, what data is in the hands of third parties and hackers. At UW-Madison, our student government actually introduced legislation to encourage the university to adopt data minimization procedures for the data that we send out to third parties. This was also something that was actually prompted first by the grad student letter of recommendation article, and then the cyber attack one sort of, I guess, buffered it as well.
Yeah, so this is all happening like recently, this sort of push, even from legislatively from the student body. Does it seem like UW has any plans to improve its cybersecurity through these measures, like data minimization or, changes to its protocol around transparency when things like this happen?
I wish I could give you a definitive answer, but I'm not sure. I know that UW System President Jay Rothman was asked about this during a Milwaukee Press Club luncheon the same day that the article released. And he had said, this was a pretty contained breach in a third party. I don't really know what sort of cybersecurity policy changes might come out of this. I think the data minimization is certainly a hope that some people have. I'm unsure if it will happen. UW does have a lot of different third-party partnerships and a lot of people doing different things with their data. And so that would have a pretty, large spanning impact if they were to change their data sharing policies. So yeah, I'm unclear on that.
How did UW respond to you when you asked for an interview? Speaking of transparency.
We ended up just getting a statement back, which answered some of the questions that we had raised in response to those emails. So we worked with what we received.
Yeah, what are the outstanding questions?
I think the biggest ones are sort of what was contained in those other records and some questions about what sort of notification methods they took for people who couldn't have their addresses tied to the records that were data breached. So Wisconsin law requires that organizations notify people they haven't contacted before whose addresses they can't locate through some sort of alternate means if they've had data breach. So that might be something like a TV report or a newspaper ad or something similar that's reasonably calculated to provide notification. I didn't get a response on a question to that. And it is sort of a murky area because, this is a third-party breach. It was the NSC's breach and not UW. So for addresses that couldn't be tied to records, it's sort of unclear whether that data breach law would directly apply to the UW in this circumstance or the NSC.
Well, Liam, we super appreciate you joining us and telling us about your article and answering our questions about it. I really appreciate it. Yeah,
thank you so much for having me on, Bianca.
That's Liam Barron, campus editor with the Daily Cardinal. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with someone who's got their data security game on lock? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, stay secure.